Heavenly Father, we come before you today with a wonderful lesson ahead of us, another amazing book that you have preserved for us, that you have given to us to help us to understand you better. And we thank you for that. Thank you for the lessons that we're going to learn in this study as we today look at the book as a whole in the overview. And as we continue with this group of people, Thessalonians, I can't say it, Thessalonians, we thank you that we have so much relevant information that can help us today in the church, in our lives as Christians, to walk in obedience, walk in a good relationship with you. So we ask that you help guide us in this discussion and guide us in our studies as we continue and conclude our time with this wonderful group of people. So we ask for your guidance in all of that, and thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So sorry, I'm gonna blow my nose real fast. It is that time of year that I was outside this morning, and thankfully I don't have a lot of allergy issues, but there's still stuff blowing around and it gets to me. And I just kept looking around and said, oh, how pretty it is outside. Okay, so as we get started in our study of Second Thessalonians, which is a very short 3-chapter book, we did our overview, and I don't know about you, but probably this was the easiest overview I've ever done because we've been with this group for 7 prior lessons. We could have almost answered all the questions, but the beauty of this too is, as we did the overview, while there's a lot of things that are similar from the past lesson from the First Thessalonians study, there's also some differences. And we're going to, as we do our chapter studies, especially, we're going to look at a lot of those differences. But what kind of literature is this? I think I saw Sandy say a letter. Yes, it's an epistle or a letter. Um, it is that which makes us know the obvious things, and the obvious things, because each one of these studies is standalone, even though I'm saying we just did First Thessalonians, and so we know a lot about this relationship. We need to look at this also as a standalone, but so we would approach it the same. And as an epistle, if you just read it through, you would have understood that. It was very obvious information that this was from a group of people to a group of people. And we learned last time in First Thessalonians, but also in Second Thessalonians, that some things, and we're going to see that. But since we know it's a letter or an epistle, then we know those two parts, the author and the recipients, and you would just start by doing what you did this week, which make a list of all the things you learn about the author and make a list of all the things you learn about the recipients. And in that process, which is part of the inductive study process, but in that process, less obvious things start surfacing. It's that idea of the puzzle where you're going to take the obvious pieces, which are the edge pieces and the corner pieces, and begin to frame out the rest. But you can't just take some obscure piece that you just like the color and shape of and know exactly where it's placed until you start with the obvious. And then as time passes, more and more and more of the obscure comes to the surface for us to see. So as we did our lists on the author and the recipients, there should be themes that begin to surface. There should be just like maybe a purpose for this letter. Certainly, we would want, as we go through the overview, to be able to say, these are man-made divisions, these chapters, but why were they, like what was each chapter about? Why was he writing that portion of the letter? We might even find that the book itself or the letter is divided into major topics, having divisions, and we might find that, and we did find that in the First Thessalonians, where we saw the first 3 chapters were based on their relationship, the past that they had together, and then the last 2 chapters were on instructions that Paul gave. But as you went through this, as you started looking at the author and the recipients, I guess it would be almost easier to say, what were there differences? Like, was there a different something that you found out? Also similar, like what did you find out that carried forward from First Thessalonians that we knew about the author and recipients, but also maybe what some of the differences are and some of the themes that come out as a result.
They both talk about the day of the Lord.
Okay, so that would be a topic. In both, and you're right. And what would be one of the first things that came out in both books, and we're talking about Second Thessalonians, about the day of the Lord, like Paul and his relationship with the people in Thessalonica. Is this a new topic for them?
No, but they were, or Paul thought that they might be led astray concerning the day of the Lord in the first book.
Right. They had questions but each time in the first book and in this one, each time Paul reminds them he had talked to them about this. So, and I had kind of forgotten this until we went back to Acts chapter 17 this time again, but Paul was only there for 3 Sabbaths. And when I say Paul, I mean Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy, all of them. But primarily Paul is the one writing that we're going to address. But he was only there for 3 Sabbaths. That could mean he was there for 2 weeks, like just the, time between the 3 Sabbaths, came on one and left on the third. Or it could mean he was there before one Sabbath and thereafter. So this could be anywhere from 2 to 5 weeks, let's say, or 4 weeks. 1, 2, 4 weeks. I gotta count. Right. He wasn't there long, I guess is my point. And one of the things I thought of about that is because of our normal experience, like what our church experience usually is like, it's if we talked about a Sabbath, we're not talking about a Saturday, but we're talking about Sunday is the day we choose to meet, generally. And on that day, we might be there for a couple of 3 hours at most. Um, if you have what we used to call Sunday school, if you have that hour for teaching and then you go to the worship service, which may be an hour or an hour and a half, you may have a little time in between, but that's it. So, as far as teaching time is concerned, in most of these situations, now if your church is different, that's fine, but you kind of know this is just kind of the typical. You might have a 45-minute teaching time, if that, in Sunday school, and then you might have a 20 to 45-minute sermon, depending on your pastor, but depending on your church, on during your worship time. Okay, so teaching time would be reduced down to kind of at most an hour and a half on in our typical setting, if you had all that. You might go on Wednesday nights if you still have that. You might have a small group during the week. You might have, and that might be weekly. It might be less than every week. Whatever your circumstances are, if you added it all together, the actual time you might meet, and you could include this, like we're meeting, you're studying, but we're meeting and all that. Most Christians are getting less, like 30 minutes maybe a week, to possibly more, possibly as much as 4 or 5 hours if you're doing multiple times and multiple things. But can you imagine that Paul imparted all the information that we can gather from just reading First and Second Thessalonians? Can you think that on a Sabbath, those 3 Sabbaths, that he was given 30 minutes to an hour each Sabbath, and he imparted this information on the level that they understood it? I don't think so. I think their time together was much more extended. Like I don't know what their normal synagogue Sabbath would be like. Because I have no clue. I have no clue what that would be like. Probably only men, not women, maybe, might be part of it. But I would, so I don't know what their normal would be. But basically, he's a visiting speaker, and they might have given him more time. Like they may have come and stayed all day, and he taught that long. And knowing Paul, he also taught outside, like he didn't just teach on the Sabbath. He utilized all the time that they would give him. There's places in Acts that talk about him speaking so long into the night, this guy fell asleep and fell out of a window down to the ground, and it was like, I think second story, I'm not sure. And they thought he was dead, and Paul had to go and pick him back up, and the boy was not dead. But I mean, not that Paul was boring, just the guy was sleepy. It went so long. And so I just think about and as I've told you, and I've actually expressed this to others, one of the things I got out of First Thessalonians and probably Second Thessalonians as well is the fact that the eschatology was included in his brief time with them. So it's included in the gospel. And one of my friends I was talking to about this, she does precept, she does it elsewhere. She's in Florida. And she was saying that her recent brother-in-law, like she's remarried after her husband died, and he's unsaved and he's sick. And she was like, oh, that is such a good reminder to talk about Jesus' coming again. Talk about, you know, not just his death, burial, and resurrection, which is very important, but the fact that we have hope that he's coming again. We also need to express what we're going to see in this book as well. And that is for those that aren't saved, what does the day of the Lord look like? Right. And by way of warning. And so I was telling her, I said, not only talk about Jesus's return, and whether you would talk about the rapture or the millennial kingdom or any of those, talk about the day of the Lord, which is full of wrath and it's bad, but also talk about what we know, if you know what you know about Revelation, which is a time frame no one wants to go through. Like it's bad, and it's someday it's going to be even worse. So I think it's important, and I've mentioned before, Jesus spoke about hell more than he spoke about heaven. Not to put more like hell is more important, but just there's a warning that needs to be given. And you're not going to necessarily talk somebody into heaven by talking about hell, but it is incumbent on us to give that warning, to let people know. And she had said her brother-in-law he seemed to be open, and then he's like, it's all going to be fine. I know it's all going to be fine. I'm not worried about it. And he's not saved. So he needs to be worried about it. So as you go through, yes, the day of the Lord is covered in both. It's definitely covered here. And there's a concern when Paul writes about the coming of Jesus and the day of the Lord in chapter 2. It seems one of the differences, maybe from the first book to the second, is that someone has possibly written a letter and acted like they were Paul. If that hadn't happened yet, Paul is at least warning them that that could possibly happen. And then we see at the very end of this book, Paul saying, I am writing this with my own hand. Okay. And apparently, one of the things that was known about Paul's letters is while he might not have written down the whole thing, somebody else, like he might have dictated and somebody else was the scribe, there was a portion of the letter, like the greetings at the end, that he would write with his own hand, and put his own mark on it or whatever, to give that proof, because the proof of it being from Paul, it gives the authority to the letter. Okay. So nowadays we are dealing with AI, and almost like every day you might see a video and you have to have your radar up and go, is this real or not? And even before AI became such a big thing, we know there was Photoshop, doctoring photos, changing out people and stuff like that goes on all the time. So we're in a time when it is almost impossible to know if what you're presented with that your own eyes see, if it's not you standing and watching it yourself, but if you're seeing it online somehow, it's almost impossible to know was, did that really happen? So you almost always, like I'll be telling my husband something I've seen or looked at, and I keep saying, I don't know if this is true. I'm just telling you what this, it's like it's kind of proposing a thought that would require more research, or be aware this is a possibility. Okay, so Paul is talking about that. Be careful if somebody comes along and gives you a letter and says it's from me, that here's my mark. Make sure that the letter is actually from me. The other is what they had been told, and we see it in chapter 2, was contradicting what Paul taught them. And he's reminding them, remember what I taught you. Okay. And again, how does that relate to us today? Like in our Christian walk, not just in our everyday walk, but not with information from the world, but in our Christian walk, how are we to be on alert? Are we to be careful? Can people come along and teach something that's contrary to what you have been taught before? And I say it that way because there's been things in my Christian walk that have had to change, but it's been changed based on the word, not based on somebody's word, not just based on a teaching from somebody. Do we have to be careful of that?
Yeah, because there's a lot of deception out there because he even says, don't be deceived.
Yeah.
And I think that's, of course, more today than it was back then. But this surprised me because this was fake news because I think they probably got a fake letter, I would
I think
think.
they very much probably did.
And that's to go, I mean, not, like nothing's changed, but it's at a higher level.
Yeah,
And yeah, we are definitely there. And Jesus says in end times, that'll be one of the signs. Many will be deceived.
right. And
So,
even the elect, he says, could possibly, it's going to be so compelling. It's going to be so okay. And as you're saying, it's hard to say it's more now than then. I do believe it is, mainly
mm,
because of the technology that we have.
mm,
And like I said, AI, Photoshop, people just flat out lying and making things up. Whatever, there's a lot of deception going on. And that's in, like I said, in all of our life, like
mm,
every aspect of our lives. And then when you come to Christianity, there are, I mean, I'll just throw out one, David Koresh. There were people that were completely fooled by him. And Jim Jones, was that Jim Jones? Is that the one I'm thinking
yeah,
of that did the Kool-Aid? Um,
correct.
and it's tragic. I mean, it's absolutely
Mm,
like both of those are tragic situations. Partly that's how we know about them, but there are people that will come along, and those are pretty drastic ones. Like, but there's a in our area, not down in my county, but up a little ways. Um, there is every time I turn around, there's another um, building that has this church letters on it that I kind of know a little bit about it, but I don't know that I think it's solid. And I mean, every time I turn around, there's another church that probably has been bought, the building, and this has been slapped on it. So it's a movement that's growing really fast. And again, it I think probably 80
mm,
something percent of it is probably pretty good, but there's just enough that I know about it that gives me caution, lots of caution. And so um I'm just so I don't know that it's bad. I'm just saying I definitely have my radar up, and I see it growing. So it sometimes these movements within Christianity are compelling. They're meeting people at a touch point, whether I'm hesitating to say a need, but they're meeting
mm,
people and filling something that those people are desiring. But we also know Paul talks to Timothy and says they're going to desire their ears to be tickled. They're going to accumulate people that they're going to listen to, that are going to tell them what they want. And okay, somebody said something. Janice raised her hand. Go ahead, Janice.
mm.
I think we need to be careful what we click onto because I don't remember if I clicked on something or somebody sent me something, but um, it was about the Book of Enoch. So
Okay.
then, and that's gaining steam. So once you click on it, whether somebody sent it to you, and like I said, I don't remember how I
Right.
got it,
Right.
but that's all you get. You're just
Yeah.
bombarded over and over. Like I had to completely put the phone down and not pick it up, those apps for a while
Hmm.
before it just cleaned itself out. But yeah, even if you're not looking or don't mean to,
Right.
you click on something and that's all you're going to get.
And I talk about that a lot myself because I am on a lot of the on social media quite a bit. And I say it like this, it's like once you watch one, you'll just be fed more and more and more of that same thing. It's called the algorithm.
Yeah.
And it again, and when I keep using the word compelling, but it gets to where Shakespeare said years ago, an oft-told lie becomes truth. Now, we know it never becomes truth. If it's a lie, it's a lie, right? But it's just in the repeating, it gets to where people go, well, I've heard it here, I've heard it there, I've heard it everywhere, I believe it. And it changes. That's why these things are so powerful. And it tends to come up, and I don't want to get political, but it tends to come up in the political realm and in a time where the midterms are coming up or the big elections are coming up or whatever, where it'll just be you're bombarded with this version and it becomes like you begin to think, is it got to be true, right? You've got to be careful. You've got to be very careful. So, like you said, even in clicking, even if somebody sends it to you, I got an email the other day from somebody I know, but I've learned I don't click on anything in it. But I opened up the email because it had her name on it.
Mhm.
And but when I clicked on her name, if you do the drop down, it's not her email address, but her name is there. So like when you get the email from me for the videos, it has my name. It says Peggy from Peggy Payne. I get the same email, so I know it says Peggy Payne. So you assume it's actually from me, which in those cases it is, and usually my subject line. But in the email that I got from this person, it was saying, it was just kind of vague saying, you and I did whatever, and this would make sense when you see all this, So if you clicked on it, you're probably going to see a video or some pictures or whatever. And basically, it's usually a virus they're trying to send to corrupt your computer, or it's a door to into your personal information. So you got to be really careful. So don't click on things. I actually sometimes, if somebody sends me something, whether it's through messaging or an email, I might send them a message and say, did you send this to me? Because I don't open up things unless I absolutely know. Like if my daughter sends something, I know. But so anyway, it can happen. They can, and another is I think it was last year, I got a phone call from the sheriff's department here in my county. That's what it came up on my phone. It was the Monroe County Sheriff's Department. And the person on the other end represented themselves that way and presented this very scary scenario that my husband was home and my son happens to be an attorney. And I said, ask Corbin about this, because I'm thinking I've got to do something and they're telling me I have to bring money and I have to do all this stuff and show up at the sheriff's department, which was me. I was thinking, I didn't give him any information, but I was thinking, this just doesn't sound right. Right. And so I talked to my son, and he called the county clerk, or the clerk of the sheriff, and said there was no court date today for that. All the stuff that this guy had said, and he refuted. And so I'm telling the guy over the phone, hey, I just found out there was no court date today. There was no whatever. And eventually the guy hung up. But we ended up calling the police. They came to the house to take a report saying that they had been, because I wanted them to know this was out there. They're not going to find this person, but apparently they can clone. Like they could call from your phone number and tell and apparently they know it's you, and say it's you. Or um, another one of these scams is they'll take a child's, maybe even a teenager's phone number, call the parents, and say something, the child's been in an accident, the child's been, arrested, whatever it is that's scamming the parents and scaring the parents. And so they say if you get one of those phone calls, just call that number, like call and a lot of times the person will pick up and you're like, are you at the, courthouse? No, I'm not, but they can do that. So just be aware they can spoof or spam your number. They did the sheriff's department number. There's so much that's very possible these days. So just have your radar up. But and that's why I agree that with Jim that we are in a time where this is more available, more prevalent than maybe it was in Paul's day, because in Paul's day they would have had to write a letter and one piece of paper or scroll or whatever would have had to be delivered, right? Back in the day, our lifetime, if you just got your mailbox filled with junk mail, it was irritating, but it took that to get to you. Now there's email. Now there's social media. Now there's messaging.
Yeah, I was thinking, this is interesting because they actually thought this happened. The Lord actually came. And here they're living a faithful life. They're living for God. I mean, this is really a great role model for church. And then
Yes.
then they're thinking, oh my gosh, was I
Did I
saved?
miss it?
Did I lose my salvation? I mean,
Mhm.
they're living, I mean, the life that they're living is just like, off the charts for Christ,
Yeah, you're right. Right. And in this letter, again, you don't have Paul fussing at them. He
they,
he addresses basically one little fraction of the people that there's maybe an issue with, and even then he considers them Christians, and he says
Mhm.
how to deal with them, right? Like deal with them as a brother, don't deal them as an enemy. But yeah,
Uh-huh.
so they're living, you're right, they're living large. They're living the Christian faith that Paul had taught them and handed to them. They're living it out. But then comes along these
Yeah,
confusions, these
right.
icky things, these
Uh-huh.
doubt, the things that cause doubt, right? So this is a great,
Maybe they went to a panic. They just,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. And that's where it's so important that we're solid. This is why precept, I think, is so important because that causes us to really dig deep and
yeah.
understand the word so that we're
Hmm.
not going to be easily led astray.
Exactly.
And yet, it takes a while to kind of get there. You think about your
Mhm.
early Christian days, your first years of study, and you don't know at the breadth of what you might know now. And so the other thing that's so important is that if we're solid, we've got to help people that don't have the knowledge that we have and help them be solid. And basically that's the pattern we see with Paul, right? Paul gave them the original information. Somebody's coming along and muddying the waters and causing some doubt, confusion, and scare. And Paul has to come back and remind, these are the things I taught you, whatever they had heard that caused them to think the day of the Lord had come, which I told you the story of being outside that time and hearing the horn off in the distance and looking up and thinking, did I miss it? Did I? And I mean, I laugh about it now. In the moment, I wasn't laughing. This was no joke. I was literally going, thinking, I was waiting for that twinkling of the eye, maybe the dead had gone and we're next. And that was because our pastor had been teaching so much on it. It was so much a part of our thinking in that particular moment, and which is a great thing, actually. That's a wonderful, wonderful place to be. And I've also studied Revelation for years and years, and it just really can grab hold, and I love it. It's a wonderful study. But Paul's talking here about the day of the Lord and the confusion that has come in. And so one thing we can take from that is we are not to be confused. And if you go back to First Thessalonians, where he'd already written them, this is a sequence. This is after the first one, right? It's not just the smaller letter; it's after the first one. He refers to the day of the Lord coming like a thief in the night, and that it is not going to catch the Christians unaware. Okay. So when we looked at sequencing of events, you've got Paul going. Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy went physically to Thessalonica. They were there for 3 Sabbaths, however long that was, 2 to 4 weeks, and moved on. Before they came, they had been in Philippi, where they had faced what? What had they faced in Philippi? What's another theme in these books?
Affliction.
Right. Affliction, persecution, tribulation, all those words that we saw in First Thessalonians, but we also see here. And Paul had to tell them in First Thessalonians, I told you about our afflictions, and I told you I'm going to be afflicted. So don't let that throw you. Don't let that cause you to be, concerned in obviously concern for me, yes, but not concerned about Christianity. And he also told in First Thessalonians and here that they are facing from day one. The people in Thessalonica faced affliction from their own countrymen. Again, that's why this overview is kind of easier, because we know about that, and it's ongoing. It's still going. We in America, thankfully, have been not so much faced with that kind of affliction, but it's already happening. Like we saw, um, just it there was I'm trying to think of where I heard the story recently, but there was a story I heard recently about someone who, oh, she was at work and she was asked about her Christian faith. So she answered, and they were asking specific questions like about premarital sex and things like that, her views. So she just calmly and nicely gave her views, and then she got fired because her bosses said her views were offensive. And she is actually suing because that's discrimination. And she didn't force her views on anybody. She didn't call anybody names. She was asked and she answered. So, according to the story I read, and I'm going to always give that caveat. But the days are coming. We saw the Kentucky clerk that wouldn't sign the marriage certificate or wouldn't sign the marriage license for a homosexual couple. And she got in a lot of trouble. I think she lost her job, but got it back. I can't remember. And she was just basing it on that's not that goes against my beliefs. We're seeing things like that, and we as Christians have to decide in our lives, in our workplaces, in our interactions in the world. Like, I don't go out and try to pound Christianity over somebody's head, but I will, it comes up in almost every conversation. Like I was buying plants the other day and I just brought up how, probably a couple of things, but one, like I've got poison ivy and I wonder why, God, why? Why poison ivy, right? But I also just brought up how this place, it's local, it's a nursery. I'm really glad to find it. They only deal in native plants. And I just said, you go to these nurseries or you go to like big box stores like Lowe's or whatever, and you buy the bright, beautiful flowers or plants if they're more perennials or whatever, and they aren't native to here. So they can become, kudzu is a great example. They can become invasive. Everybody planted Bradford pears, and now Bradford pears are taking over everywhere, and they are very invasive and they're not a good plant. So anyway, I brought God into the conversation because I don't know how I talk about weeding too. And every time I have to go out and weed, there's so many spiritual implications to weeding. We got weeds in our life, got to pull them out by the roots. And if you're not careful, you're going to disturb the root of a good plant, right? That's the wheat and tares analogy. So anyway, we can bring it into conversations, and we need to do so and identify ourselves. For one thing, don't hide. On the other hand, realizing that that's not always going to be how handled well. Like people aren't going to necessarily love you for that. And some have had some really bad experiences that we need to acknowledge, but maybe we can help bring some healing to let them know somebody that isn't going to use Christianity as a guise to scam them, because that happens too. So as we go about our day, and here they are, I thought about this today for some reason. we know that they were being afflicted by their own countrymen, but think about that. That means it could be by their own families.
Hmm.
And if you think of anybody, or maybe not, you don't know somebody in particular, but if you think about, like, my daughter went to Ethiopia and was on mission trip a couple of times, and the sports camp they had was for children, and some of those children would get saved as a result and go back to their homes. So the organization that she was involved with, the people that were there all the time, had to help and follow those children because a lot of them could be kicked out of their homes and then they're on the streets because they had heard the gospel and received it. Put that into the times of the Thessalonians. They're living in a pagan culture and they're coming out. Remember in First Thessalonians, they turned from their idols and they turned to a living God. That can have consequences. Jesus said, count the cost. Before you enter into this, we need to tell people to count the cost and obviously not scare them away from it, but just we don't want them to be the rocky soil or the thorns and thistles that choke out the worries of the world. We don't want them to not make it to the harvest. We want them to be so planted, and it looks like these people are. And again, here in America, we haven't really faced that much, but I think it's coming. We're seeing glimpses of it. And certainly, if Islam takes over, which is their goal, Christianity is going to be choked out.
Hmm.
And we as Christians have to decide, like, are we going to stand? And how are we going to stand? And but I will say, if you look at Islam, it fits a lot with the problems that are described in Revelation.
Hmm.
Beheadings, for instance, that's a common theme among Islam, where they'll even take children and cut their heads off. So I'm not saying it's absolute. I'm just saying some of it fits with what the lawlessness that's going to happen. So as we look at this book, and I've really let me go off on tangents very much so today, but we know about the afflictions that they face. That's still a theme in this book. It hasn't stopped. Between the two, we looked at when this was probably written, and we know that the trip to see them was during Paul's second missionary journey. The first letter was written during his second missionary journey, and the second letter was written during his second missionary journey. So that's somewhere between 49 and 51 AD. It's a very short period of time. He was there for a short period of time. His first letter was written not too long after he was there, and his concern was for them. So he ended up sending Timothy because he was thwarted. And then we have this letter. So there's a lot that's happening. And again, if you think about your own salvation or somebody else's, if you know about somebody fairly recent, one of the things that can happen really quickly after they get saved is a lot of problems. Like they're going to get hit because Satan wants to thwart this salvation. He wants to do his worst. They may never have faced any attacks by Satan because they were in his kingdom. Now that they have left his kingdom, they're targeted and they're going to go after him. So it can be pretty intense early on. We need to come alongside people. We need to be there for them and help them through those times and help them figure out, what's truth, what's what lies. But we also see, if you follow Paul at all, it was very, very, very common that he would go somewhere, and after he left, at some point, like the Judaizers would come in and they would confuse things, saying you have to get circumcised, you have to go through Judaism to get to Christianity. They would claim, or say maybe from Jerusalem. So, they kind of had that authority, it seemed, and Paul would have to address that. A lot of his letters are addressing issues of false teaching. So what we're seeing in chapter 2 is that we're seeing false teaching. and specifically about the day of the Lord and Jesus is coming. And we're going to go into the detail of this when we get to this chapter, so I don't really want to get too much into it. But the man of lawlessness, the things that have to happen before that have not yet happened. He's already told, it's amazing that he's told them all of this. He's reminding them of that in this letter. And maybe he's adding a few details that he didn't tell them the first time. That's also possible. Because I'm sure there would always be, well, even with us, we always have to learn. But what's true in the first letter and in the second letter is there is a difference in these events. There's a difference between how Christians are going to face them and how non-Christians are going to face any of the future things. And that is something Paul tells them about, but it's something we need to hear, and it's something we need to be telling people about. So you've got, these differences between the saved versus the unsaved. And he prays for them. Those are recorded in the first chapter. I'm sorry, the first letter. There's prayers, what he's asking of God for them on their behalf. He commends them for so many good things that they're doing, right? Their faith is, like in the first chapter, it talks about, we speak proudly of you among the churches for your perseverance of faith in the midst of the persecutions and afflictions you endure. So in that, you see the afflictions, but you also see their practices, right?
Mhm.
They have perseverance.
Mhm.
And faith, how they're enduring the suffering. And it says this is a plain indication of God's righteous judgment so that you may be considered worthy of the kingdom. So they are worthy. And if they're also continuing in and being able to be considered worthy for which you're indeed suffering. And then there's a statement in verse 6 of chapter 1 for after all, it is only just for God to repay with affliction those who afflict you. So here's a promise that even though they're going through affliction and persecution, they're persevering, their faith is enduring, they're being found worthy, and they're enduring all of this suffering. That's part of the perseverance. They're enduring all of this suffering, but also here's the promise that God will avenge them. God will afflict. And I just wrote, God will afflict your afflictors. It doesn't say it that way, but it's just another way of putting it. And that goes back to what we know. We see it in the Old Testament, we see it in the New Testament. Vengeance is God's. He will repay. And you may not struggle with that. I do. So I'm just telling you, I struggle with that. I want to speak up. I want to make people stop, whether it's for me or for someone else. And yet I have to remind myself, it's not my place. Doesn't mean you don't speak up. You can speak truth into a situation. Just don't take actions of afflicting. Jesus was reviled, did not revile in return. He was a silent lamb led to slaughter. We have to think about, in all these situations, how are we to respond? And that doesn't mean we stay silent. I mean, I know I said Jesus was silent, but that was to slaughter. That we can speak truth, we can speak up against lies, we can do all that, but we are not to afflict someone. Don't return the favor. The golden rule is not do unto others what you have had done unto you. It's do unto others what you would want to be done to you.
Yeah, I think this is a very encouraging letter as far as somebody going through affliction right now,
Yes.
because, why do I suffer? And this is saying, why do you suffer? Is because you're suffering, yeah, because you're considered worthy. So God is testing you, and that's perseverance, that's endurance, that would bring spiritual growth. So very encouraging that it edifies somebody, our, other believers, if they're going through this. And we probably don't do that a lot, but this is very encouraging,
It
you
really
know.
is. And you brought up, I know because I thought of James when you said that. James says,
Mhm,
your endurance leads to, your, well, I'm not going to say it right, but it leads to your growth. It leads to the the pressure cooker that you can come under in Christianity should produce out of it someone who has endured, who is found worthy. But you kind of said it differently, and I think it's important too to understand we are worthy, we are found worthy,
mhm,
and we prove out that worthiness through our
mhm.
perseverance. But we don't like to think like when we study Job, you kind of want to go, God, I'd really rather you not notice me. It's like,
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I know.
right?
It's easier said than done.
It's easier said than done. And yet at the end, and it's not what Job got in the end. It's not the restoration of
Mhm,
his fortunes. That's not the what we need to get from the book of Job, although God was gracious in that. Because there are too many people martyred across the world over the
mhm,
past 100 plus years and more, but especially concentrated for us to sit here quietly and comfortably, not enduring much of anything
mhm,
and, you know, and think that they like should they suffer but not us?
mhm,
Are they lesser than us because they're suffering? We got to watch how we look at that. I said last week that my own situation with having an estranged child has it's it's horrible sometimes, some of the things that have been said. Um, and I trust me when I tell you, I self-reflect a lot. Like, what part did I play? Lord, show me my faults. Is this cause and effect? Like, did I bring this on? I think we need to ask those questions and go to God with all of that. But there's some things that come that aren't because cause and effect. Like, you didn't deserve it. And yet
mhm.
we've been told we deserve this. I was even told by a sibling that God took my son away to protect him from me.
Hmm. Oh, gosh.
Yeah, that can't be unsaid. and and it hasn't been unsaid. But I mean, she hasn't even tried. But my point being, sometimes we suffer because we bring it on ourselves.
Right. Yeah, I know we
And
do.
that's
Our
not a
Christians,
suffering, that's not a suffering for the gospel.
you're
But
right.
sometimes you suffer for the gospel, and it is for your good and the
Mhm,
good of, like when it says, you know, my mind's not working today. In Corinthians, it says that no temptation comes that God that hasn't been, you know, already happening to all humans, but God will give you the way of escape. Not, and it's not your goal really to look for it. God will provide a way of escape, but you can endure it because he will be with you when you endure it. And it
mhm,
comes on those who love him and are, called according to his purposes. So we need to, I'm mixing up verses, I know, but we need to understand that these people, it's hard to say it, are blessed
mhm,
because of their afflictions. They're refined through these afflictions.
mhm,
We should want refining. And unfortunately, our human nature is such, we don't get much refining when things are comfortable. We don't get refined very much when things are comfortable.
mhm,
But um, so yes, look at this situation. I was talking about my situation last week just to say that sometimes people look at someone who's going through something and blame them and put or question or see them as lesser. Like, you know, at times like, are we not my husband and me, are we not used in the kingdom of God because we have this taint on us, and so that's not up to me, that's up to the other people. But what God is saying here mainly is, yes, you are being afflicted. And through Paul, he's saying, yes, you are being afflicted. Paul is being afflicted. Christ was afflicted. We're not better than our master. But also, it's not just don't take vengeance. We have to know that, but also God will. Be assured of that. And I, a lot of times go, it might not be in this lifetime. Like it might be in their judgment after, their eternal state. And again, I mean, there's a term called precatory. Anyway, prayers that, what's that word? Prayers that David prayed in the Psalms against his enemies. Basically, I'm just going to summarize it. Sometimes David was saying, God, go get them, right? I'm not sure I recommend that type of prayer. But I do know this. I know I can say to God, you will, and it doesn't just say he will just, like he will just do it. It's saying he will be just. His justice, it will be pure in how he deals with that. That's what we can pray for, is pray that I can endure knowing that. Pray that, and as I say a lot of times, I want mercy for myself and justice for everybody else. I got to remember I need to want mercy for them as well. Right? But God will perfectly balance his mercy and his justice. And that's something that we can know, that they were told as well, that and it says he will give relief to you who are afflicted, and to us as well, when the Lord Jesus shall be revealed from heaven with his mighty angels in flaming fire. Not necessarily today, not necessarily next week, not necessarily in your lifetime. So these are things I have to tell myself all the time. I may never see it in this lifetime, but I absolutely know it will happen. And he says, dealing out retribution to those who do not know God. This is part of the unsaved part, who do not know God, and to those who do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus. Obeying the gospel includes believing the gospel. Okay, we know that believing the gospel leads to a life of obedience. But the trigger point, the first part of obeying the gospel, is believing it. Remember, the one unforgivable sin is blaspheming the Holy Spirit. It's amazing to me that it's not blaspheming the Father or blaspheming the Son. It's blaspheming the Holy Spirit. Now, they're three in one, I know that, but somehow there's a difference, right? And I've wondered, I remember as a young Christian being scared about that, like, what in the world does that mean? And because I don't ever want to do it, right? So I thought, and the best possible explanation for blaspheming the Holy Spirit is this idea right here. Did you believe him? Because if you say that the gospel and all that is entailed in the gospel, the true saving knowledge of Jesus, right? If you say that it's not true, you're calling the Holy Spirit a liar. And I don't think any of us do that. A person who does not believe the gospel is calling the Holy Spirit a liar. And that is the unforgivable sin. Okay. So, and it can be very active, and it can be also somewhat inactive. You can also not obey by not doing whatever. And it says, and these will pay the penalty of eternal destruction away from the presence of the Lord. Now, we're going to look at all this in much more detail later. We're just trying to fly at a higher speed. So the first chapter, if you were to title it, what did you come up with chapter 1 as a title?
I have Thessalonians faith. Faith grows greatly during persecutions and afflictions.
That's really good, because it includes a lot of the themes, right? Um, and okay, so I'm gonna put mine down. Yours is very similar, but you grow in church persecution, and kind of a secondary theme or a second theme is there is relief when Jesus comes. So the first part is very much, Jim, what you just said, which is, well, it's actually growing in a persecuted church, or however you want to put that, and then relief when Jesus comes. Again, remember, there's no like one way to say any of this. Just to hit the highlights as you have gone through this lesson, as you look at the authors and you look at the recipients, and those themes have come up. We've written down some of the themes that they should fit. Your titles should fit these overall themes. So in chapter 2, what is it about?
About the coming of the Lord.
Yes.
And
And you mentioned it earlier that they should not be deceived, right?
yeah, it's about fake news.
Right. So
Well,
don't be deceived.
yeah.
Don't be deceived.
The man of lawlessness too is in there.
Right. The day of the Lord hasn't come. And then also the lawless one, or the man of lawlessness, the lawless one to be revealed. You could just say lawless one revealed, but he hasn't been revealed yet. It's going to happen. So I've got don't be deceived. The day of the Lord hasn't come, the lawless one revealed. Okay. Again, if your title fits somewhere in there and it
Mhm.
helps you understand what that chapter is about, that's great. And then chapter 3, we haven't really discussed it too much today, but he starts out by asking for prayer, right? Um, and then he goes into what he typically does. Like, he has some things he discusses in the beginning, issues that he's dealing with, their confusion, their comfort, and the concerns they have. Here, he moves into commands. So he has commands about the undisciplined or the idle, and commands about work. So there's a prayer request. And there are commands about the undisciplined or idle, and about work. We looked at a lot of this last time. Um, we even, suggested that possibly why Paul was having to address some of the things he addressed in the first book were because there maybe some of this idleness is because they're just like deciding why bother working because the Lord's coming. But it also really, even if you take that part out, like if you don't know that they're focused on Jesus's return, it's wrong for someone to be idle and not working because, and we talked about it before, it causes them to not only not be able to give, it was Janice that said that, to not be able to give, but also they're taking. It's what we're seeing in our country today, and you see it in Europe and other places. You've got these people that have come in, and it's not just mass immigration, but it's just the example of today. You've got these people that are coming in, just getting themselves signed up for the programs and taking. They're not contributing. Um, and but that was happening even long before mass immigration. You've got people now. When I was a child, when I was a kid, first started driving, there were 5 of us, but I was number 4. When you first started driving, You got to be the one that went to the grocery store and bought groceries for the family. And you had a list and you had money, but we were in school. I had a job, things like that. So I had to go on a Saturday. And we learned not to go on the first Saturday of the month because that's when the food stamps were given out, when the people would, go to there were a lot of people, and we're talking small grocery stores with like not much space in the aisles and stuff, not these massive places and all. But it was a learning. I mean, I came back saying they had their carts full of soft drinks that we didn't buy, like we couldn't afford that. Plus, it's not healthy. And, I would be asking my parents all of these questions, but it was a learning experience as a 16-year-old about people. And we said then you have second and third generation that have been on government assistance all these years. There are people that have never known a life. And now, how many people have never known a family member to work? They've always been on. I saw a statistic of the county I'm from here in Tennessee. I don't live there now. The county I'm from, that more than 80% of that county was on some form of government assistance. Our country can't continue. That's crippling. And when you pour in millions of others who don't speak the language, don't care to assimilate, aren't working, and go on the dole, that's an old word, but go on the dole, it's crippling. It's happening in these European countries ahead of us. We need to watch. But in this case, he's talking about people in the church because he's very clear. Treat them as a brother. Don't treat them as an enemy. So these are Christians, or people who are claiming to be Christians, that are idle, not working. He's telling them they should work, and if you don't work, you shouldn't eat. And he's telling them there's also this idea of this kind of a result of being undisciplined, or unruly is another word used. They're running around, they're busybodies, they're causing problems. And so if there's any condemnation in either of these, it's to this very small, this group of people, not the church as a whole. But he does tell them how to deal with it. So do you think if there was a third Thessalonians and they hadn't dealt with this issue, that you'd have Paul coming down a little harder on the church? Here he's it's very gentle, and he's saying, address it, deal with it, don't let them continue. It's causing chaos, it's causing problems. Anytime someone who can work, and remember, we're talking about people who can, anytime there's somebody who can work, who is not working, who is taking the bread as literal eating, literal food, they're taking it from someone. Remember that, not just from someone who has worked, but they're taking it away from someone who might actually need it. And again, that's what we're seeing in our country today. We're seeing all this fraud. I don't know if y'all saw, California is passing laws that will penalize people like Nick Shirley who are exposing fraud. They'll have fines, they'll have criminal charges brought if they go ask the questions and expose the fraud. There's nothing being said about those who are committing the fraud. And you could say, well, that's California money, but this is federal funds that are being, some at least, if not all, is federal funds so that's you and me. I just paid my taxes. It makes me mad every time, and there was a whole movement in the country this year of people saying they weren't going to pay their taxes because it's all being wasted, and it's in this massive amount of fraud that's going on. We see it in Minnesota. We see it in California. I'm sure it's here. I'm sure it's everywhere. But you do kind of get to the idea of like, why should I pay my taxes if they're just going to hand it to somebody and not use it the way it's intended? And you might have potholes in your streets and they're not being fixed, or whatever you see really close to home. But the point is, it is not good for human beings to be idle. It's not our created state. It's not the intention. It's not our eternity, actually, that we're going to be idle. We're not. And the people that do have time on their hands are the people that end up causing problems. And so Paul is telling them, do something about it. But do it as a brother, not treating them as an enemy. But food is a good motivator. If they're showing up and they're saying, I need my bread for today, and this gets implemented, they're going to be told, you don't get it unless you actually work. Used to be our jails would be like that, our prisons would be like that, where I don't advocate, hard conditions necessarily, but giving them something to produce. Used to be license plates, for instance, or breaking up rocks. There's an old picture of that. But sometimes you'll see work crews out on the side of the road picking up trash. And I've been told, I don't know any criminals, but I've been told a lot of them are really glad to get out, right? They'd rather be on the side of the road picking up trash than sitting in a cell. So you can see a motivation there. But I had a pastor once say, what if all the churches, think about all the churches in your city, your town, your county, whatever, if all the churches would end up, a representative, whatever, go to the court system, and let's put it really close to home. Let's say somebody in your congregation was burgled, had somebody break in and steal from them, and the person was caught, and they're in front of a judge, they're in a court, right? If that person went to the court system, hopefully with their pastor too, and appealed to the judge and said, instead of putting this person in jail and no production, no, is that even going to work? How about they come to my house and they work off their debt? They pay back restitute, which can be 3 to 5 times as much. Like if they stole $100, they would do $500 worth of work up to, let's say, but they work it out. So that relationship, now you've got a connection. Now you've got a person you stole from, not a thing you stole. And you have that connection. And that's very risky. I get it. I don't know that I'd want a criminal coming to my house, but you can see that had we taken a stance like that years ago, that maybe there would have actually been, like, maybe this person, there truly are cases where people are desperate and they steal to eat. Like they're actually working to eat by stealing. But it's never a good thing. But back in the day, they used to cut people's hands off for that, which was not smart, because then they can't work. But what if instead of just setting them in a jail somewhere where they can A, learn how to be a better criminal, or B, get horrible things done to them when they really weren't that bad a person, they're not going to come out better for it, I don't think. Some might get scared straight, but basically, if as a community we could truly rehabilitate them by showing them there was a cost to what you took, there was a cost to the damage you did, and you're going to pay that back. And you're going to restitute, which is what the Old Testament says. It's 3 to 5 times. I think it could even be up to 7. I can't remember the exact numbers. But what if we took that attitude instead? And in the case of a church, if you've got somebody that's just taking instead of producing and giving, put them to work. I've said this of, youth groups going on mission trips. I've had them come and say, buy a candle from me. I don't buy candles, but, like buy a candle from me or whatever. At least they're trying to raise funds. But I've had them also just want money given. And I've looked at them and said, hey, I've got weeds you can come pull. You know how many of them take me up on it? I've had a few, but not many. Most want you to hand them money. And instead of working to earn money to go on a mission trip, that mission trip would mean a whole lot more to them if they actually worked to raise the funds. And I would say in probably about 90% of those mission trips, if you sent the money that you raised instead of paying for plane tickets and all that stuff, it probably would go a lot farther than a group of kids going. Now, there's also value in making those connections and having them um, minister to people. There can be value in it, but it needs to be evaluated. But I say youth, there can be adults that are going on mission trips and asking for money. I saw a family recently, their whole family, kids and all, were going to go on a mission trip and they were asking for money. And I'm like, you probably have more money than I have. Like, why are you asking me for money? But, um, and I support missionaries, so I do see the value in mission work, very much so. And anyway, Paul's addressing this. He mentioned it in the first letter. Apparently, it's an ongoing issue. I can only imagine what the third letter would have said if there's not one. I'm just saying, if he had to address this further, he might have been able to go back. I don't know that we've looked at that. And he could have addressed it in person. There's other of his epistles where he addresses issues and basically says, I'm going to address it here. I'm with you in spirit. You better deal with that. You're not going to want my words when I come. So um, that's how we should be dealing with things in our churches. As if somebody has a need, we should be meeting it. There's people that have circumstances that cause them to be in need and want. We need to be coming alongside them. But if there's just somebody who just won't work, we don't need to be handing them stuff. We need to actually be kicking them in the butt and telling them to go get a job or helping them get a job. How many of your churches have things that could be worked on around? Like, we pay somebody to mow. How about somebody who in the church could mow, and we provide their family with food and or it could be their job. We had a work day at our church just last Saturday, and about 25 or 30 people showed up, which is good. But there were a lot of people, especially leaders, that weren't there, and they were the ones that set the date, but they didn't come. So, you've always got that. You've got this inequity, but we have. So overall, did you find a reason? Did you find a verse that you could say is the reason Paul wrote this letter, or a theme for the whole book?
I, I just sort of came up with a patience in afflictions and suffering and regarding to the coming of the Lord. I don't know if that's anything.
Well, that's yeah, that encompasses a lot of the themes. That's not really bad at all. Um, I found verse 15 of chapter 2, where he says, stand firm
Mhm.
and hold to the traditions. Um, taught by us. And the word traditions has kind of gotten a bad rap recently. But when you put it in the context of what Paul's talking about here, he's just talking about what he taught them, the teachings, the truth, this foundation for them becoming a church. So don't get caught up in that word that's been misused in other ways. But this is, again, yours, Jim, is fine because it definitely encompasses the themes and would fit with the chapter titles and all. It's just good when you can find a verse that actually kind of summarizes what Paul is saying in this entire book. And so that's what I went with. Next week, we will start looking at the individual chapters. So we'll be doing chapter 1 as we do our chapter studies. We'll just have 3 more weeks. This is a very short study, and we'll see. And it's good that we have this background from First Thessalonians that can just easily segue into here, but we also see there are some differences. Like the information in chapter 2 was not in First Thessalonians. Some of it, yes, the reference to the day of the Lord, but the extra information, we'll look at that. And then this stronger teaching on what to do with the unruly and the people who won't work. It's mentioned here and there. The afflictions are mentioned in both. The commendations about their faith, but you can see in this book that he's talking about even more growth, like they're continuing to grow. A healthy being of any kind, healthy living thing, which includes a church, grows. When growth stops, that thing is dying. And I don't necessarily mean numbers when I say growth. This growth he's talking about is growth in their walk, in their understanding, their application of what they know. So next week we will, Lord willing, if we meet next week, we will be discussing chapter 1. Do your homework, and let's end in prayer, and we'll come back and watch the video. Father, I ask that you will take these truths into our lives. Help us to find ways that we can change and grow as a result of what we're learning. Help us to know that there are things that, as an organization, church, as our local body church, that we might need to be dealing with. And so often we fall short of that or shrink back from it. And that is not healthy for the whole, but it's also not healthy for that individual if there is something that they need to be admonished about, something that they need to change. It seems judgmental, and a lot of times we don't want to do it. But Father, I just ask that you give us the wisdom and you give us the courage and to be able to discern what needs to be dealt with and what doesn't need to be dealt with. Not just every little petty frustration. But we want that discernment from you, that wisdom, and we want to proceed in the way that would make the whole body healthy. And so we thank you for the guidance that we have from Paul, his guidance as a discipler, as he's making disciples, and then they're going off. Their growth, their relationship is wonderful to see. We ask that we would find those things in our lives as well and be part of being like this relationship and being like Paul, and who is following Christ. And we thank you for it all. And we ask that you will guide us as we go into chapter 1 next week and then the following chapters. And we ask for it all in Jesus' name. Amen.